Welcome to Bled Talk, the podcast where insightful conversations meet language learning. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, and on this show, we dive deep into a variety of topics with fascinating guests from all walks of life. Whether you're an English learner looking to sharpen your language skills, or simply someone who enjoys thought-provoking discussions, Bled Talk is something for you. From engaging interviews to solo episodes filled with knowledge and inspiration, join us as we explore the world one conversation at a time. Get ready for a journey of learning, curiosity, and meaningful dialogues. Welcome to Bled Talk. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Bled Talk. We are with Josh Lewis. He is an accent coach. He helps people with their pronunciation. He's been doing this for over 9 years, and he has lots of experience and a lot of great stories to tell us today. And so, Josh, I want to thank you for coming on to the episode, and also ask you to kind of tell us a little bit about your story. Give us some of your background.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sam, for reaching out to me, giving me the opportunity to come on your platform. I'm really excited to connect with you and your listeners. My background, I'm from Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. I went to K through 12, even college in Michigan, from East Lansing, Michigan, which is right next to the capital. And, normal childhood, I would say. After college, kind of like a lot of people that graduated in my age group because of the whole car industry collapse, we all left Michigan to find jobs. So I went to Washington, D.C. for 5 years. I did a variety of jobs, kind of entry-level stuff out of college. I had a good experience in DC. I learned a lot. It's a lot different than Michigan, culture-wise, rules-wise, security-wise, lots of things. So it was fun. I met some friends that I still have to this day, really good friends. I kind of got to a point where I just wanted to change a little bit, switch up the scene. DC felt kind of heavy, the city, the cost of living, all this stuff. And I was thinking about moving to the West Coast. That's the trendy thing to do, but I'd also kind of been thinking about traveling. But, one day, one of my older friends, he's probably about 20 years older than me, a guy living in the area, he randomly came up to me one day and he goes, if you ever get the opportunity now, you should travel. That's the one thing that I regret not doing when I was younger. So I said, oh, well, I've already been thinking about making a move. So, I sold my car and gave away all my stuff and packed up my bags and bought a ticket in 2014. I went to a couple of different countries and then I landed in Colombia.
And why Colombia? You said you went to a couple countries. What made you want to stay in Colombia?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny because one of my friends from college, we used to hang out, like watch the Pistons, and like rap is like freestyle rap, just regular fun young kid stuff. He had experience in South America before me. He had been to lots of different countries. I don't know how many. And he was living in Colombia. And so I reached out to him and I just kind of said, like, hey, this is the short list of countries that I was thinking about trying to, set up for, an experiment, see how I like it. And Colombia was on the list. He just said, no, just choose Colombia. Trust me. It's got everything you need. And, it's going to be the best fit for you. So, I made a couple stops on the way because I didn't want to just go to Colombia and then get stuck and not, see other stuff. So a couple stops on the way, and then I got here, and the first couple of months I found a job, and then the story began.
Awesome. No, that's cool. And tell me, you got to Colombia, and you said after a couple months you got a job. What was it like just showing up in Colombia? Did you have any Spanish before, or did you just go in head first, no experience?
Yeah, I didn't know anything, man. Like, I knew how to say a couple words. You know, I had, done a little bit of like, Duolingo app stuff, but, that none of that was really sticking. I did learn a couple ways to talk about food because I had been a vegan for 5 years in Washington. So like, I didn't necessarily expect to be vegan in Colombia, but I didn't want to be able to like, talk about like, what does this have? Or, what's meat, what's chicken, things like that. So I learned those, but I didn't know anything, man, in the beginning. And it actually took me a while to learn Spanish because, in the beginning, there was enough people. I was in Bogota, so it was the capital. So, obviously in the capital, there's lots of people that have a lot of education, and a lot of even Colombians were speaking English. I was working in English because I was teaching English, and, a lot of my friends were English teachers as well. So there was really not a lot of necessity for me to even learn Spanish. So, the first couple of years, I learned, they always like to teach you the bad words, the swear words, how to be rude and all this stuff. So, I mean, like, I try to speak Spanish is just like so awful, like just totally disrespectful, just from the street. But, I started more and more, keep trying to study. And then I ended up moving to Medellin, and less people there spoke English. I try to take myself out of the English community a little bit more as well.
Yeah.
And then I lived in a small town where I asked my neighbors one day, I said, do you guys know how to say the word no in English? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh. So in the small town, I mean, my English or my Spanish really boosted up. And I took some class. I started taking classes about 5 years into it. So I think now I've got a pretty good level. I can easily live my life in Spanish, and I think my pronunciation is all right as well. It's interesting here. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but that's kind of how I got into the pronunciation, is because that friend that recommended me to come to Colombia, we were hanging out one day, and he goes, man, Josh, your pronunciation is like really hard for these guys, these native speakers, to understand. You're not pronouncing anything in the way that their ears kind of expect. And it was a surprise to me because I thought I learned all these words and everything, and I thought I was doing good, but I didn't put the pieces together, like why they didn't always understand me. So, from that point on, I kind of like adjusted my ear and really started paying attention to the differences. And then, I started, kind of integrating that into my classes and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's interesting that you talk about that because in Portuguese, which is similar to Spanish, it's funny because people say, oh, Spanish and Portuguese are similar. And I think it is for people who don't speak Spanish and who don't speak Portuguese. But when you really learn both of the languages, you realize that they are very different. And in Portuguese, there's a couple words, and there might be in Spanish. You can tell me if there is. But in Portuguese, there's quite a few words that just the accent on the last letter will tell you if it's, for example, the word for grandpa and grandma is the same word. It's just a different accent over the O at the end. And so, some Americans struggle really hard to say grandpa, and when they want to say grandma. And so I think a lot of times people forget that pronunciation is really key to getting people to understand. I even tell my students, I say, look, you're saying the right word, you're just not saying the word the right way. If you say the word the right way, people are going to understand it. And it's because there's a lot of teachers. I don't know if you see this in your community or in Colombia, but at least here, when I see teachers trying to teach English to Brazilians, right now, there's a huge fad in telling kids, or not just kids, but students, you don't need to speak perfectly. They'll understand you. And I get the idea of trying to pass confidence, but at the same time, I always tell people there's a difference between having an accent and then just flat out saying the word wrong. And you can't encourage people to keep speaking poorly because we won't understand them. No matter how much they think that we should understand them, we won't. And so I think that that's super important that you talked about that. And
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree.
yeah, and so you got to Colombia, you arrived in the capital, and it kind of sounds like you eased into learning Spanish. Like you went from big city to a little bit smaller to small town, and now you're like, oh, it's either slide or fight kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I I was the opposite in Portuguese. When I got to Brazil, I actually came as a missionary, and when I got here, they sent me to the end. It was literally the end of the train line. So I went to the end of the world, and nobody spoke English. Not even the guy that I worked with spoke English. So it was either learn how to speak or die. And
Yeah.
I had a lot of experiences of, crying myself to sleep because I'm like, this is impossible. I don't know if I can do this. But after some time, you kind of start to pick up on it. And this one doesn't have so much to do with the language, but you deciding to move to Colombia. How do you feel like you were received by the people? Do you think that like, did they see you as like, oh, look at this American guy coming over? Or how do you think that they saw you?
Yeah, I think that it's gringo privilege is the easiest way to say it. I mean, like, I had never experienced that. I mean, especially then. I mean, now I think it's, at least in the bigger cities, Colombia is really blown up as a tourism place. But in 2014, it was still kind of like on the cusp, and so you're kind of like a star, and the Colombian people are really nice, so they really want to cater to you and make sure everything's good if they can help you. So I've basically felt like a rock star a lot of the times because some of them had never really even spoke to an American person. They've just seen it on the movies and things like that. So I would say obviously you have the other side of it too,
Yeah.
where it's you got to take care and be careful that some people will take advantage of you a little bit. But I didn't really catch too much of that side of it. I think overall I had a really positive experience, especially with my students, and my friend group and things like that. It was always really, really friendly and pleasant.
That's awesome. That's really important, I think, because that's what helps people either decide to travel somewhere or to stay at home. Because some people have those experiences where, like you said, it's like a gringo privilege, and it has the you just get treated like a rock star. But then there's people who go places and they get looked at and they're like, oh, another American trying to come into our country, and they have this other experience, and so that's really cool. And so we were talking a little bit earlier, and you had said that you had taught classes before, and then now you kind of really moved into just pronunciation. And tell me a little bit about that. You kind of told us a little bit earlier, but like really, how did you decide, you know what, I really want to focus on helping people pronounce words correctly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so when I started teaching English, I mean, I had a TEFL and that was it. I didn't really have experience. And the company that hired me, they're just like, here, take these worksheets, go teach them. You know more than them, so just do it. So, it's kind of like, I think it was good because I really studied and tried to understand what, they needed help with. And, especially with the higher level students, I've had students that probably know more words than me in English, right? So there's no reason to teach them vocabulary, or some students that, make one or two grammar mistakes in a whole hour, right? But one thing that I noticed is that 99% of Colombian Spanish speakers and lots of people, especially Colombians, I mean, that's where I was working with exclusively, but they really couldn't pronounce simple past tense, ed verbs with any clarity. Like, and a lot of them didn't even use past tense because, it just didn't come out. So I spent a lot of time, going through the rules. Even after teaching them the rules, something still didn't match because they knew what to do, but it just didn't come out that way. So, I just went through a process of doing like, investigation, what is the difference between, the sounds of like T and D, started to learn about voiced and voiceless sounds. And then what it really led to is like, oh, wow, there's a completely different way to power the voice. The voice is powered from a different part of the body. The way that they're controlling their voice is different in Spanish than in English. And that's why they're not able to pronounce those sounds no matter how hard they try, because they're powering their voice the same way. So I started looking at things like that and working with the Colombians. And then eventually, like probably about like 2017, I started working on some online platforms, and then I started getting students from all over the place. And I started just seeing that, these are, across the board things that, people from Russia, Ukraine, China, Italy, they're all kind of doing the same thing. So, I just kept going further and further with my investigation, trial and error, collaborating with other pronunciation teachers as well, until I really kind of formed my own unique methodology, that can pretty much work across the board. Obviously, adapted a little bit depending on the person, learning style, background, things like that. And then also, I guess to add to that, I guess I kind of touched on it, but I wanted to take, those high-level students all the way moving forward, because I felt like some of those high-level students in my classes were just taking the class and just, nothing was happening, nothing was changing. So I feel like, pronunciation, especially because it's not taught for them in the schools at any level, is like, that really sets you apart. Someone who knows all the words with, unclear pronunciation, and someone who knows all the words with clear pronunciation, they're miles, whole world apart in terms of how people receive them and understand them.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome story, and I think that's really cool that you were able to see that in your classes. You were able to see that, hey, they may know a lot, but they're still all messing up on that one thing. And you're right, it's not just a Colombia thing or a Brazil thing. It's everybody who's learning. And I think I tell my students a lot of times that sometimes I think really when you start to understand a second language, at least this is how it was for me, you start to realize that, like for me, for example, Portuguese is Portuguese. It's not English. It's not a translation that came from English. There are some similarities, but I need to stop thinking of Portuguese as like, how can I use English and just translate it? No, there are things that are similar. And I always tell people, you can definitely use Portuguese to help you with your English, and you can use English to even help you with your Portuguese. But they're different languages, and they all have a different way to be spoken. And I think once people kind of understand that, hey, maybe if I try and listen to how they say it, right, how the native people are saying things, that would help me be able to speak better, have a better word order, and, have a better pronunciation.
Yeah, it's a totally different way of even thinking about, just even thinking, I think. I mean, like, in English, we say like, like I like, I like, right? But in Spanish, it's like, no, that thing gives me like me gusta, like that thing gives me like. So it's like, a whole different reverse. There's a lot of other examples, but yeah, you got to think in the target language. And I think that's why they say it's easier to learn the third language, right? Because your mind has already accepted the idea that it's not direct translations, and you can adapt a little easier.
Yeah, you kind of understand that. I think the hard part of learning the language isn't even the language itself. I think it's you understanding that all languages are not the same, kind of breaking those barriers. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. And did you ever have those moments when you were teaching that somebody asked you a question, like a student asked something about English, and you said, yeah, I don't know why, I don't know why it's that way. Or they've asked you, why do you say this instead of saying this? I've been asked that all the time, and I go, that's a good question, because I don't know. Obviously, we have to go find the answer afterwards, but I think it's interesting that sometimes people just expect you to know why certain words are the way that they are. Have you ever had that experience before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, every time you face a new topic when you're a new teacher, I mean, articles, count, non-count nouns. That's a great one. And as well with pronunciation is a huge thing. But, I think you get a pass as a pronunciation teacher because a lot of times the answer is there is no answer because it comes from so many different languages, right? It's a mix of languages. So the answer is, you need me.
Right. The answer is that's just how it is, accepted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I tell people that because they'll ask me about why is five and then why is 15 not 15? Why is it 15 and why is it 50? And my answer that I always give people is because in Portuguese the word for 500 is quinhentos, but the rest of them is like you say the number, and then you say centos after that. And I asked them, I said, why is it that? Why is 500 different? And they go, I don't know. And I said, yeah, that's language. Sometimes that's just how it is. We just have to accept it and move forward. Eventually
it's the same in Spanish. Yeah.
Eventually it'll come. Why do we say that something is on TV when it's not on the TV? And you're like, I don't know. Maybe ask the people who created the TV because they're the ones who created the preposition for how to do that. But yeah, it's an interesting situation. And
I just asked a Spanish teacher the other day, I don't know if it's every Spanish speaking country, but in Colombia, like when someone calls you or, you want to tell someone like, I'm coming, I'm on the way, right? They say like ja, which is like already. And then like to go, like for me would be like boy. I think it's fairly similar in Portuguese.
Yeah.
So, you could just like ja boy. But here is a little bit more common to say ja ba, which would be third person. But when they say ja ba, it's the same person that shows up. It's the way I thought you said he was coming, but then you came. So like I asked the teacher, I was like, well, why? She's like, I don't know. So I was like, so I use it the same way they do, but in my mind, it's always like this, why?
You're like, this doesn't make sense. I accept it, but it doesn't make sense. It happens all the time because I ask people because as an English teacher, just I guess as a language teacher, you almost have to be ready with those examples because students will come to you and you'll say, I don't know. And they'll be like, well, why don't you know? And you'll say, well, what about these? Do you know these? And they're like, no. And it's like, okay, well, we're even, right? There's no, it's one of those things that just kind of happens. And a question I have for you is, since you've been in Colombia for a while now, have you gone back to the United States regularly, or do you just primarily stay in Colombia for the most part?
Not regularly. I mean, I've been back for like a couple weddings or like maybe like a New Year's Eve or something, shoot up, come back down. But I've been pretty much full time, 10, 11 months out of the year since I got here in Colombia.
Is there anything that you miss from the U.S. that's not in Colombia?
Not that much, to be honest. Like some of my friends more than anything. I personally think that the culture in the US is super toxic. And here is really chill and like, no one is, you don't have the day-to-day, arguments and, people really, I've been here almost 10 years. I think I've seen 2 fights the whole time I've been here. I mean, if you can see a fight almost every day in the US. I know for a while when I was living in the small town, I was really missing vegetarian restaurants, things like that. But I mean, in the bigger cities, they're really starting to grow. Where I live here, I'm vegetarian, by the way. I have 4 restaurants I can walk to here in this city where I'm at now. So, I mean, I don't think I miss anything about the culture. When I look at the news, the headlines, it's just like, man, I'm glad that I'm just here. I can focus on my thing. No one is, worried about my political preferences or, anything like that. People are more just trying to move forward with their lives, get along and avoid problems, after this, they've been through a lot of issues in this country in the past. So I think most people want to just, try to move forward with their lives and help each other as well.
They're kind of in a rebuilding process. And so they're just kind of trying to focus on being united and being together.
I mean, I could be picky and say that, like, I wish sometimes some things were more organized, right? But I think that that's part of just what you have to accept when you're entering into a new atmosphere, a new place, right? You can't go and expect it to be the way that you want it to be, or, I wish that people were on time more or something like that. But I mean, those are things that I can adapt to and just learn to have a little bit more patience, and know that, the best way for them isn't the best way for me. But look, we're all getting it done at the same time.
Yeah.
So
I understand that. I think that is a very interesting answer. That's an interesting opinion, because a lot of people that I meet who live outside of the U.S., they miss the U.S., but they don't miss the U.S. because of the same thing that you say that you don't miss, if that makes sense. Like, I think in every culture you have positives and you have negatives, and I think sometimes some people are more affected by the negative parts, and sometimes people are more affected by the positive parts. Because, for example, when I tell people that they ask me if I miss the U.S., and I say, I miss my family and I miss my friends. And there are some things that I miss about where I'm from. And I think that people forget that, for example, Colombia is like the size of one of the United States, right? And so the culture of Colombia is very focused, and you have the whole group that kind of experiences that. Sure, there's regional things, but, it's a pretty tight-knit culture. Whereas here in Brazil, for example, if you live in the south of Brazil versus the southeast versus the northeast versus the north or the Midwest, it's all different. It feels like you're going to another country. And the same thing in the U.S., I think. I tell people that all the time. Like, I lived close to St. Louis. I do not miss St. Louis at all. I do not miss the city. It's dangerous. And, maybe the sports, I like that, but I can watch the sports here. But there's not a lot of things that I miss about the city. But I was somebody who lived out in the country, right? I lived kind of far away from that. And so, the whole small town, you have a homecoming and a homecoming parade and funnel cakes and all of that good stuff. I do miss that. I miss having that kind of thing, but I also really love the traditions that I experience here, where I'm at. And so I would say that I miss the good things. I miss a lot of this stuff. And like you said, politics in the U.S., it's just as divided as it is here in Brazil. And so, like, for me, here I'm like, well, it's the same thing. And I always tell people that I'd rather hear about the politics in English than in Portuguese, because then I understand it a little bit more. But it's a really cool thing what you said. I thought that was interesting. Is that go ahead.
Another point here. This is might be a little bit extreme. We might be diving in. I just wanted to touch on this. Something that I think is really interesting is that if you in the U.S., if you ask a person, "Hey, what are you?" the first thing they're going to do is they're going to name the color of their skin or their race, right? Like, "Hey, what are you?" Like, "I'm black, I'm white." Here they say, "I'm Colombian." And then they might say which region they're from. And then after all of that, they'll go to, maybe like, their physical appearance. But I think that, like, it's such a different way to look at, nationality and identity. Is like, no, I'm from this country no matter what. Whereas, in the U.S., what are you means something totally different.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you, because I think something that's interesting is like, and I think that the United States used to be, if you look at kind of how culture has evolved, I think that people used to be more unified, and people used to be, obviously there's lots of things that have happened, but I think in general, a lot of people used to be a lot more proud to be an American than they are today. And it's exactly what you said, I know, without diving super deep into a whole cultural thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's in the United States, there's so many. There's race wars, there's gender wars, there's all kinds of things that why? Like why are we going through that? Our ancestors, right? Our grandparents, our great grandparents, they went through that. They did all of that, and I don't think that why are we trying to fight a battle that's already been fought? And but I like what you said. I think that it's interesting that there in Colombia, people identify themselves as a Colombian, and in the U.S., it's not always the case. And like I said, it's also a regional thing. Sometimes depending on where you are, depends on how much you love where you are. Some people hate where they live, and yet then you meet people from the South who just absolutely love being from the South, and I think that plays a really big part into whether you enjoy it or not. But that's an interesting topic. We'll have to talk about that in a whole different episode at some point.
Yeah, it's a whole episode in itself.
Yeah. There's a lot, and a lot of times people, here in Brazil, people have those questions. They, apart from teaching English, I think sometimes we're responsible for helping people understand culture in the U.S. as well, and kind of how people see things, how people understand things. They'll ask about, because they'll still watch the news, like you said, and they'll see all these things that are happening. They'll be like, is the United States really that, are they really that racist? Or are they really that way? And I said, well, in most places, like what you see on the TV doesn't exist, but they're not going to show you all these people living happily together because nobody wants to watch that,
Exactly.
People just want to watch all the violence. And I tell people, I'm like, no, most Americans are pretty okay for the most part,
Yeah.
It's interesting. And we're getting kind of close to the end to the episode. And so I want to ask you, what kind of tips would you give somebody who is struggling with their learning process in English, kind of shifting gears? I know you said that you moved towards pronunciation, and like you said, that's kind of the thing that really differentiates from somebody who is seen as like a basic intermediate to somebody who is like a B2 advanced type speaker. What are some tips you could give somebody who feels stuck and they just feel like they can't move forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in general, I've felt stuck, and I know some of my friends have felt that way, and they tell me, in English or Spanish, they tell me, oh, I just don't feel like I'm moving forward. I think that whether it's language or pronunciation, grammar or whatever, pronunciation, you can't expect to jump from 0 to 100. You have to really look at the small victories. And, whenever I've had someone tell me that, I'll say, well, I'm sure that you can easily say that you're better than you were last year, right? And so then if you continue next year, you're going to be better than this. And, that's especially with pronunciation training, because that is a thing that, is a whole new world of people using their bodies differently and things like that. So I always compare it to going to the gym, and if you go to the gym, once a month, then those are the results you're going to get. If you go, in a consistent, routine, then, 3 months from now, you're going to notice a difference. And then in another 3 months, and then 6 months later and things like that. I think that for learning just the language, not pronunciation, one thing, like I always say, the best teacher is necessity. Like, if you have to do something, you're going to remember those words. You're going to remember to do it. I remember the first time I went to the bank in Spanish, I was like so lost. But then after that, I knew how to say savings. I knew how to say checking. I knew how to do those things, and I never forgot it. So, if you put yourself in the situation where, you're going to be using that, whether you find an online conversation buddy or something like that, it can really help. But you got to look at the small victories.
Absolutely. No, that's an awesome tip. And another question I may have for you is, how would you advise, or how would you counsel somebody who has moved to a new country and kind of feels lost, feels like alone, what would you tell them to do so that they could kind of get away from those negative feelings?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, like, it's now I don't know the language, but you just gotta go outside your comfort zone. That's what you did to begin with, right? When you moved to that new country. So, going outside your comfort zone, putting yourself in social situations. I mean, like here at the restaurant down the street, they have a movie night on Thursdays, right? That's an easy way to go to start, having people recognize your face. I think that, once people start recognizing your face more too, they're going to be, more likely to start talking to you, get to know you, things like that. But you gotta search out activities, because you're not going to have your friend group back home that hits you up, say, hey man, are you coming over for the game this week? It's just not going to happen until people get to know you. So you gotta take that time, to dedicate, find those events, find those activities, go put yourself there. And then, I think this is one of the tips that comes out online all the time, is that, I mean, some people may not want to, but for those that do want to, try to avoid being super attached to your, the people from your country, the expats from your country, because there's a lot of things that are going to, hinder your development with the language, with the culture. A lot of times expat groups have a tendency to, especially Americans, maybe not other countries, but they have a tendency to come together and complain about the country, and things like that, where, it's just going to not push you in a direction where you're going to be enjoying it as much as you could and gaining and learning as much as you could by doing those things, taking yourself outside of your comfort zone. So that's what I would say is a good start.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I teach a lot of people who move to the United States, and they move there with the illusion of, if I live there, I'm going to get English from drinking, right? And so they move there, and they have this thought, and but here's what happens: they always find their group, and like you said, it isn't just Americans. We're talking all countries around any country that has a large group of expats. They are going to find each other, and they're going to kind of create a group, and they're going to have their own foods and their own things. It'll help you in some cases, like, oh, I know a guy, for example, if you're from Brazil, you're like, oh, I know a Brazilian guy who is a mechanic. So you can go to him and speak Portuguese and not have to worry about problems. And they do that. They kind of create their group and send you to people where you won't have to be in that uncomfortable position you were talking about. And that happens. Like, luckily, I haven't ever really found an American group in Brazil. Now, I haven't ever looked for them either, but, it's one of those things that for me, I always tell people, I love to talk about culture, and I love to talk about the differences and things that I like about the U.S. and things that I don't like about the U.S. Because I always tell people, my home is my home. Where I was born, that's always going to be where I'm from, and I'm proud of where I'm from. But I know it's not perfect, and I think that that's okay. I think it's okay for people to love where they're from and not think that it's the greatest, and but I don't think anywhere is the greatest. I think we all have struggles. We all have problems, and I always tell people who ask me, they're like, well, what are the problems like for Americans? And I was like, well, the problems in Brazil? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, imagine that, but with English. And they're like, there's problems. I was like, what's the problem in the world? Nobody likes the president. Nobody likes their government. Everybody hates taxes, and it's too cold or it's too hot. And it's all the same, It's all the same. Your back hurts. You work too much. It's, and nobody likes the rich people, and then it's just it's everything everybody complains about, but it's everywhere. And so I always tell people, just kind of make the most of it. Like you were saying, go out of your comfort zone, go to the movie night, go do something. But once again, Josh, I really appreciate your your ability to be with us and the opportunity that I had to talk to you. I thought it was awesome, and it's crazy how fast the time went by. But you know, in the future, I hope to have you back on, and I hope that you'll want to discuss even more. And do you have anything that you wanted to say before we finish?
Yeah, I mean, no, I just think the same. This was great. The time flew by. It was really fun. I hope your students get a lot out of this, and I think that in the future we could meet back up and really dive into some other topics or get deeper in. I think we just kind of touched on some basic stuff. So if your students are contacting you with questions about some of the things we talked about, we can maybe cover some of that stuff or anything else. But it was really great to hear your perspective, your experience, a little bit of your experience in Brazil as well, man, because that was one of the countries that I thought about going to, but then I was just like, man, Portuguese is just 2 countries and Spanish is so many. So I was like, I gotta go to Spanish.
But Portuguese it's getting there. There's lots of people learning it.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, well, if you're ever in Brazil, let me know. We'll figure something out. Or if I'm ever in Colombia, I'll give you a holler.
Awesome, man.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you everybody else who listened. And like Josh said, if you have any questions or any comments, if you're watching on YouTube, you can comment there, or if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, just find us on Instagram. I'll have Josh's Instagram and all his other socials there, and I'll have mine there as well. You can send us a message and ask us any questions, and like Josh said, if there's enough of them, we'll come back and we'll talk about all of them in more detail. But thank you everybody, and have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on Bled Talk. Thank you for listening to Bled Talk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. Don't forget to send in your questions and your suggestions. Thank you once again, and have a great day.